So a few years ago, a movie came out called The Social Network. Maybe some of you have seen it. And that movie documented the founding of Facebook. And it followed Mark Zuckerberg from his dorm room all the way through the initial public offering. And for me, the one key scene in that movie is when Sean Parker, who is the founder of the first digital streaming service, Napster, Mark goes out to California to see him. He's very excited. He's talking about there are people who want to invest in Facebook. And Mark gets out there and he says, I got a guy who wants to give me $1 million for Facebook. I take it, right? I take it. And Sean Parker looks at him and goes, that's not cool. $1 million isn't cool. You know what's cool? $1 billion, right? And so as we all know, Mark did not sell the company for $1 million or $1 billion, but it went public, and it's now worth north of $350 billion, right? There's another company. It's been around for a little bit longer. Some of you might know it. Some of you might shop there. It's called Amazon, right? Founded by Jeff Bezos in 1995. Jeff Bezos' Amazon and Alibaba's Jack Ma are right now competing to be the first global e-commerce platform, right? And this is largely going to play out in developing market countries. But something interesting happened along the way. A few years ago, last year in particular, Jeff Bezos had a sale on what he dubbed, what they call here in the U.S., Cyber Monday, right? And in that one day, Amazon sold $1.4 billion worth of products in 24 hours. Well, I had this scenario where I imagined in my head that Jack Ma and Jeff met, and Jack looked him in the eye and said, $1.4 billion? That's not cool. You know what's cool? $17.8 billion. On the Double 11 shopping holiday in China last year, Alibaba sold $17.8 billion worth of merchandise in 24 hours. It's the largest single shopping event in human history, and it is the exclamation point for what I believe is the emergence of Alibaba as the most important retail, e-commerce, and technology company in the world today.
Sorry, could you use the microphone?
Oh. It's on. You know what, Shoshana? It's the first time anybody told me I'm not loud enough. But thank you. And so I've been working with Alibaba for more than 15 years, but especially over the last few years, I've developed a very close working relationship with them. As Ali pointed out, I wrote a book called China's Super Consumers. The reason we call them China's super consumers is not because they wear capes and rescue kittens out of trees. It's because they are the fastest growing, largest, and most important consumer segment in the world today. The United States has a population of 320 million people today. China has 600 million online shoppers. 600 million. China's got more than double the amount of online shoppers today than we have people in the United States. If you're a brand, a retailer, a university, or an investor, and you're not thinking about Chinese consumers, and you're not thinking about Alibaba, you're missing the future. So I have the great good fortune to have known Brion Tingler for many years. We ran around Beijing together for a few years, in New York. And I've known Brion for a long time, and really one of the smartest people in tech today. And Alibaba is very lucky to have him. Prior to Alibaba, Brion was the head of external affairs at Lenovo for 5 years and oversaw some really exceptional global expansion at Lenovo. And now he's in that position at Alibaba and doing equally great things there. And so Brion is going to take you on an exploration tonight of what are the business units that make up Alibaba, what is the philosophy they have for going after 2 billion, that's cool, 2 billion customers globally, and really reinventing the entire face of retail. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce my good friend, Brion Tingler.
Okay.
You got it.
Wow, what an honor to be here with all of you. Thanks to our hosts, Medgar Evers, Confucius Institute for Business, SUNY Global and great to see some old friends in the crowd here tonight. It's a real honor for me. I mean, as Michael said, I started my career in China. Can everybody hear me okay? I worked there for about 5 years in PR firms, mostly helping multinational companies come in and sell to China, or sell themselves, present themselves to Chinese government, Chinese consumers, stakeholders there. I came back here to New York, changed jobs, and then about a year after that, I started at that company. The new company said, we want to open up an office in China, so go back. So I went back, helped open up the Beijing office. After about 4 years, my wife and I found out we were having a baby, so decided to come back. And kind of the opportunity with Lenovo kind of fell out of the sky. And a similar thing happened about a year ago with Alibaba. So I consider myself super fortunate and a recipient of a lot of good luck. And some of that good luck is being here with you guys tonight. I'm gonna give you guys some thoughts about China, what Alibaba is doing there, because I think that there are some hints or some insights that we can gather about what the future of commerce looks like as a result of that. So I hope this is interesting. Afterwards, Michael and I will sit down. We'll talk a little bit amongst ourselves, and then open up the floor to some questions. So I hope that's helpful and interesting and useful. Before we kind of jump into what Alibaba is doing, I just want to do a real quick run through the development of China's last 40 years for those of us in the room who may not follow it super closely. A generation ago, most people in China bought everything that they needed from rice, the daily staples, through shoes and things like bicycles with government-issued rationing coupons. Things have changed a lot. The economy was an agricultural economy, but by the early 80s, starting in the early 80s and mid 1990s, mid 1980s, can you hear me? The Deng Xiaoping's reform and opening up. Deng Xiaoping was the premier of China then. Reform and opening up efforts really started to yield some substantial results. China was starting to become a center for factories and was exporting initially lower added value products, industrial commodities, but very quickly made its way up the value chain. And by the 90s, everybody was really referring to the place as the factory of the world. In the last 10 years, there's been a real shift. The heavy industry still exists. The massive government-supported infrastructure projects are still happening, though give and take depending on what GDP looks like. But the real change has been the emergence of a consumption-based economy in China. That means that people they have discretionary income, and they're spending it on the things that they want, the things that make their lives better. Cars, air conditions, all of those things. And finally, as this consumption engine has really taken off, we're seeing a surge in e-commerce. E-commerce is really skyrocketed. China will be the largest cross-border e-commerce economy by 2020 in terms of sales going in and out of the country. So, like an agile pop star, China has transformed itself yet again from the factory to the world's consumer. So this transformation is really not over. There's still a huge amount of growth ahead. By 2020, it's predicted that China will do about $6 trillion of consumption. That's a 55% growth rate over the next few years. We'll still be behind the United States in terms of its consumption power. But if you take a look at those growth rates, the conclusion of this story or the next chapter of this story is pretty clear. So if you're a brand or a business that's considering selling into this market to these newly minted consumers, you really shouldn't panic. The opportunity is only going to grow, and Alibaba wants to be able to help, but there are lots of ways to get into China. Michael mentioned a little bit about this. I'm not going to go over too much of the stats, but But the one thing that I think is really important in terms of the size of the amount of people online in China is that China didn't follow the same pattern as we followed here in the United States and the Western world in terms of exploring the internet. They didn't go through the dial-up, the laptop, the desktop, the laptop, and then finally their smartphones. Many of them started on the smartphone right from the beginning, and consuming, buying, commerce, and buying things online is not an issue for most Chinese consumers on their mobile devices. I think 670 million people were online, 700 million people by now, and 90% of those people access the internet through their mobile device. So, big numbers and important. Good news is they're also spending a lot. By 2019, China will account for 30% of the world's online shoppers and 55% of sales. So how can this be? A lot of people, when the company listed on the stock market in 2014, there was some skepticism by people that didn't really know a lot about China and didn't really know about us. How could the company possibly be selling as much as it is, be doing as much gross merchandise volume over the platform as it does? How is this possible if the per capita income is still a fraction of the West? Well, there's two factors here. First is scale, and the second is propensity to shop online. I talked a little bit about that, but I want to talk about scale right now. 2010. The size of the e-commerce, the number of e-commerce consumers was about the same, 140 million. But we can see in just a short time to 2020, China's going to have well over 3 times the number of online shoppers. So if you think about this, you take children and the very old out of this equation. This really means that basically everybody in the country will be buying things online, probably with their mobile phone. Again, why is this? We think, or what we observe, is really a handful of factors that were perfect conditions for the rapid economic growth. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I think it's important to kind of lay the groundwork for why our company and many other e-commerce companies in China have been so successful. First, the Chinese retail environment. There was a weak retail infrastructure in China. One telling bit of data on this is for every million people in China, there was only 2.4 malls. In the United States, it's like 12 malls per million people. Now, we all know the story of U.S. retail and malls right now. They're under a little bit of pressure. So maybe the Chinese number was a little low, maybe the U.S. number was a little high. But if you contrast this with the 700 million internet users and the fact that most people that have disposable income have access to the internet, it really creates a potent conditions for growth. You also saw the explosive growth of the middle class driving consumption. In the West, we think of e-commerce as a convenient but nice supplement to the shopping we do probably in a physical retail environment. Going to the grocery store, going to the mall. But in China, because of the weak retail infrastructure, because of even difficulty getting to the shopping mall, the traffic that you have to deal with. I mean, I used to say in Beijing, I couldn't just pop out to the store. It was at least an hour, because of the traffic. So these things created a environment where there was an openness to taking that thing out of your pocket and placing an order. So, e-commerce sales have been really the mainstream of retail in China instead of a supplementary category. Our company, Alibaba, is actually the #1 commerce platform, whether it's physical or electronic, in the country. Just to contrast this, not to say we're better, but just to kind of explain the differences, in the United States, Amazon is like number 11. So just a little bit of a point of comparison. Finally, or thirdly, in order to transact online, you need trust. You need to believe that the thing that you're going to receive in the mail is going to be received, and your money's not going to, you're not going to lose your money in the transaction. In the United States and in the West, this problem was solved through things like credit cards, very ubiquitous. China, credit cards didn't really exist 10 years ago when we were trying to prime the pump 10, 15 years ago of commerce. And so Jack and his partners created this payments platform called Alipay. Many of you probably have heard of it. Alipay is an escrow service. So basically, when you transact the money goes to Alipay and is held until the good or service is received, and the money then goes to the seller. And that company is actually making some great progress here in the United States. I want to talk about logistics more on the next two slides, but really the logistics in China very different, inexpensive, but also fragmented. So this was shocking even to me. To send an express package, you're talking about $23 in the United States from coast to coast, and in China it's like $1.16. So if you think about the kind of oil in the wheels of commerce, that's a helpful thing. And most of that is actually driven by the scale and the fragmented nature of the logistics industry in China. In the United States, we can probably all name the top 3 or 4 express logistics companies: UPS, FedEx, United States Postal Service, DHL. In China, there's like more than 1,000 logistics providers. They're not all national, and they have their various places that they compete, but that's driven the cost down. One of the things, though, it did do was create a level of inefficiency that slowed things down. And so I'll talk a little bit later about our logistics business and how the logistics technology that we helped bring to our platforms in China. But this was something that really helped e-commerce thrive in China. So now Alibaba, we heard a little bit earlier about Jack. I mean, Jack's a formidable, amazing entrepreneur. I just want to talk about a few of the factors and kind of the mentality that the company had when it got started. This is a picture of Jack Ma in his apartment in Hangzhou in 1999. These are his friends and students, and Jack had an idea to connect people on the internet and allow them to conduct commerce. The mission, even at that early stage, was to make it easy to do business anywhere. We really had this vision of helping the little guys, entrepreneurs in China, and at that point, the entrepreneurs were really a very tiny segment of the business landscape in China. It was dominated by the large state-owned enterprises and also multinational companies coming in. This is, I think, a slide I just like to show. It kind of indicates the humble beginnings. This was the first homepage of Alibaba.com. Alibaba.com, this business was a business that connected Chinese factories with buyers outside of China who wanted to buy goods wholesale. Today, it's really a lifeline. Still exists, strong business, not nearly as large as some of the other businesses, but it's a lifeline for small shops and small shops and retailers that are trying to compete against big box stores in their local communities. I want to talk just a little bit about the platforms, the platform that we have in the different businesses here. I'm not going to go into every single one. But across the top, you can see the core commerce business on the left, the mobile media and entertainment businesses in the middle, and local services. And really, these are the parts of the business that consumers will interact with most readily when you want to go buy that new toy or electronic gadget. You're probably going on either Tmall or Taobao. if you're a consumer in the United States and you want to buy most often unbranded goods, and you're just buying one or two of them, it's AliExpress. Tmall Global, which I'll talk a little bit about in a minute, is for the big multinational brands that, smaller global companies that want to sell into China. And Lazada is a commerce platform that we acquired in Southeast Asia. The payment on the bottom, you see kind of the enabling or the supporting functions. I've talked a little bit about the payments business, Cainiao, the smart logistics business, Alimama, which is our marketing services business. So if you're a seller, you're selling to Chinese consumers, very often you'll work with us to help you target exactly who you want to go after. And then finally, Alibaba Cloud, a lot like what Amazon and Google have done. They had to build huge IT infrastructures to support their core business, and then they realized they had some expertise to sell, and they're selling it. We're, I think, the #1 cloud provider in China today. One of the newest things that's not up here is the fresh business, supermarkets. There's a battle right now between Alibaba and some of our competitors on who's going to get a shot at the grocery business in China. For many of the same reasons we talked about a little bit earlier. I just want to give a little bit of sense of the scale. Michael has done a great job of introducing some of the scale, but at the current moment we have 493 million monthly active users. Last fiscal year, $485 billion in GMV, gross merchandise volume. We're not a retailer. Our model isn't to buy stuff and then sell stuff. Our model is to have a platform that people that want to buy stuff can connect with the people that want to sell stuff. So we don't call that sales. We call it gross merchandise volume. Our sales really come when we help the merchant connect with the consumer. We sell them a marketing service. In some cases, there's transactional costs. There's web services for the commerce business. Alipay, again, the payments business, 400 million active users, 64 billion transactions per year. I heard recently that was more than the number of transactions that Amex and MasterCard process. So there's a significant scale there. And then Cainiao, I just want to spend 1 second on Cainiao. Imagine you have an industry like in China, thousands of logistics providers that each have their own niche and reason why they exist. Going in and trying to build up your own logistics network might be duplicative. It will also create a lot of people that might not like you very much. So instead of kind of trying to create our own infrastructure, Jack and the founders said, there's an opportunity here. If we take what we know about technology and about using big data, we can create a technology platform that can connect many of these smaller logistics companies together. We can give them better information about where to deliver products. We can automate the process of creating shipping labels. And so they did that. And today, the business process is something like 70% of all packages delivered in China. Not the business, but the network processes something like 70% of all packages. And finally, the media business, which I didn't talk a lot about because today is really more about commerce. We have this site called Youku. It's kind of like a mashup between a Netflix and a YouTube. There's user-generated content. There's content that we're developing ourselves. Again, massive viewers, 400 million daily views. I'll talk a little bit in a moment about how all these things kind of work together. They do work together. They aren't businesses that we could easily break up. And then the last thing on Alibaba for a second is just Tmall Global, because I want to highlight this in case there's anybody here that is thinking about how to get into China. Tmall Global is a destination for companies outside of China who want to sell into China, but they don't want to legally set up an entity in China. Some of you probably know this. Establishing a company in China is a little bit involved. It's not impossible, but it takes an investment. It takes a physical presence. And so, that's often what we're finding a second step for companies that are looking to sell into Chinese consumers. And we really want to be a facilitator eventually of bigger investments into the country. But this is a good way to kind of prime the pump and get people interested and off to the races. I think, one of the things I wanted to highlight here is just the kinds of categories. Now, Michael is really the expert on the Chinese consumers, but in terms of the trends and what's hot right now. But for a very long time, baby food, baby care, health and nutritional supplements, and personal care products have been really the top of the charts in terms of what Chinese consumers want. Some of you guys may have heard of the challenges in food safety and supply chain management, and so this is kind of indicative of some of those things. Also, the United States, is at the moment, I think the top location that Chinese consumers are looking to buy goods from. But in any kind of given time period, that can shift back with Japan. So there's a close competition there. So now we talked a little bit about what China's like, a little bit about what Alibaba does there. There's a lot more we could say about either of those topics. I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges that traditional retail is facing, and some of the ways that we think plot the way ahead. So this slide, I think, is an interesting slide. This is not to ding Walmart. They were a client of mine for many years. But it just shows the speed at which the world of business is developing. It's enabled by technology, by online commerce. We don't have physical stores. We're not buying stuff and reselling it, which means we have to carry inventory and we have to have warehouses. So 13 years versus 54. And the other thing about Walmart is they're actually doing pretty good. If you take a look at this slide, this is the market cap valuations compared between 2006 and today. These numbers, I think, are from February. So, again, I'm not trying to denigrate any of these companies. They are in the fight of their lives. At the same time, these are the facts, and they indicate what investors who want to pay for future value think of the current business model of physical retail companies. I read a New York Times piece this weekend. I thought it was super elucidating on this point, written by Michael Corkery. Look it up. It's worth taking a look. I want to read a key quote. Today, some of the most sought-after real estate by retailers is not in Soho, but 5 miles away in Red Hook, a gritty Brooklyn enclave with a shipbuilding past. E-commerce merchants are vying to lease part of a huge warehouse space spanning 11 acres that will allow them to deliver goods the same day they're ordered online. The profound reordering of New York's shopping scene reflects a broad restructuring in the retail industry. So, I made this point that we're not a retailer. We're a platform that's connecting merchants with consumers. We don't compete against retailers. In fact, many of these retailers actually use our platforms to sell to Chinese consumers. So, what is the way forward? Should we all just quit and go home and let Amazon, which is a retailer, kind of eat everybody's lunch? We don't think that that's the case. We actually think that there's a real opportunity to bring the online and the offline world together. You're seeing Amazon experiment with some of those things. We're doing something similar, although a little bit different. So I think I just want to briefly talk about two of these partnerships that we have in China, and some of the cool things that I think we're doing to help bring online consumers into the physical world and vice versa. So Suning is kind of like the Chinese equivalent of a Best Buy. They're a big box store, traditional retailer in almost every city in the country. They have 250 million kind of members in their their internal customer tracking database. We have 423 million annual active buyers. They have stores that people are going in. When you buy a big electronic or electronic good or a washer or dryer, most people want to kick the tires and see how it works. That's especially true in China. And so what we've done with them is try to create opportunities for the person who may have gone in there to showroom a washing machine to scan a QR code and then finish a transaction once they make their decision through us, and then some of that revenue and the profit is flowing back to SUNY. We have an investment in the company, and we think that there's these kinds of things that are where the real opportunity is in the future, because people will always want to go in and touch and have an experience with the things that they're buying. The other thing about this partnership that's interesting is the amount of data that we're getting about what people are searching for and looking at is allowing us meaning Alibaba and Suning, to help the electronic brands to create new products. So Siemens recently created a refrigerator that was specially made for Tmall consumers, so that when things were running low, it let you know, and you could easily order more of the produce or the groceries that you wanted. And the same thing with a Chinese appliance maker, Midea. They probably sell more rice cookers per year than most small countries have people in them. They also created a rice cooker based on the data that they got through us. InTime is one of China's largest shopping malls. We did a co-investment recently in them, and we think that there's a big opportunity for landlords to better generate footfall traffic if they're tying the experience that people are having when they're shopping in a physical space to their mobile phones. We're all, when we're shopping in a physical retail environment, we're all still online because the phone is on, and we have the ability to kind of go and see, make comparisons. So we want to help retailers better leverage that to their own advantage rather than having that disintermediate them. This is one kind of fun thing I wanted to share to make, that we're doing to make the in-store experience better. Now, I don't know about most of you guys, but opening my wallet doesn't usually make me smile. But maybe it's my Scottish background. But this is a clever way of leveraging technology and big data. Alipay created this smile to pay station. So you walk up when you ring up your purchases, and to close out the transaction, you simply smile and you've paid for your goods. So simple, frictionless, and maybe enjoyable. Although I don't know, you're still paying. This kind of brings us to an important point about the use of big data. Michael was talking earlier about Facebook and about Amazon, and each of them have huge data sets that allow them to understand the people that use those sites in a pretty deep way. This is one of the reasons why so two data sets are better than one, but if you combine the two together, they're better than just the two. So we have the media properties I was telling you about earlier, the commerce properties, the social media properties, a browser called UC Web, and when you're in our ecosystem, we can see a lot of the things that you're doing. So this is on a macro aggregated basis. We're able to provide really deep insights in targeting that sellers find very valuable, and it's creating a whole new realm of possibility. Culturally, there's some differences between here in the U.S. and in China in terms of the level of comfort there, but really it's also creating delightful and engaging experiences for the consumer. I'm not getting a picture, an ad for the watch that I just bought. It's smarter than that. It's anticipating the kinds of things that I might want, and so that's really where some of the excitement of the big data and bringing big data together really happens. The other thing that this is doing is creating more and better products. This is my last data slide. Then we'll get to some fun slides. I think it's my last data slide. This chart shows over the last 3 years the explosion in the number of products. A lot of this has to do with big data and targeting, but also just the number of inputs that we now have. By 2020, Cisco says there will be 100 million more people with phones than electricity. 5.4 billion people with phones, 5.3 billion people with electricity. So imagine that. More phones, more sensors are creating more data that help us to create better products and sell more because we really more deeply understand what the consumer wants. Michael mentioned Singles Day. $17.8 billion is a big number. It's not bad, but it's not, for us, where we're looking at the future. Every year we obviously want to see that number go up, but the real thing that we're after is creating an entertaining, engaging experience. We're delighted with the commercial success, don't get me wrong, but the bigger story is the marrying of this consumption and entertainment, because that's what keeps people engaged and gives you more opportunities to sell, whether it's entertainment or physical products. So I'm going to try and end on a high note. Give you a couple examples of how we're baking entertainment into our commercial experiences here with these last few slides. This is a short video that's on a loop of a virtual reality experience that we ran in the lead up to 11/11. This is, as you can see here, the consumer he's actually in Macy's on 34th Street. That blue dot, if you point that in the right place for long enough, it'll pop open the product and give you an opportunity to engage with it in a virtual environment. And this was a huge success. On day one, we basically ran a 15-day trial before 11/11, before Singles Day. We had 30,000 people. 30,000 people within the first hour try this. We sold 150,000 headsets, that people needed to put their phones into. The first product that was consumed or bought was a package of nuts from Costco by a woman in Inner Mongolia. So, people were making real purchase decisions. We had global retailers, Macy's, Target, Costco, a couple of big retailers from Japan, Australia, and it really gave us an opportunity to test out what this new virtual reality experience could be like and engage the consumer a little bit more deeply. Everybody heard of Pokemon Go, I hope. Pokemon Go, I think to this point, I'm not sure if it's actually in China, but definitely in November of last year, Pokemon Go hadn't made it to China yet. And so what we did was we created a Pokemon Go style game where we partnered with our retail partners like Starbucks, McDonald's, Shanghai, Disneyland to drive footfall traffic into the store. So here you see a young woman, I think in a McDonald's, catching the Tmall cat. The Tmall cat is our mascot, and much the same way that you would play catch the Pokemon Go. So again, this is a way for us to deepen the engagement between users, the Tmall platform, and the brick and mortar physical merchants selling on Tmall. So you get a coupon for $1 off of Starbucks or whatnot. And then finally, the thing that I think is just really like the coolest of all of these, we did this fashion show about 10 days before 11/11. It was an 8-hour fashion show. It was the opposite of New York Fashion Week. If any of you guys have ever been to New York Fashion Week, it's an exclusive affair. It's not for everybody. Here we had 80 different brands, 50 of which were international brands. They all got to take over the stage, show the things that they thought were the most interesting. Consumers could go to the stadium where this took place in Shanghai, or they could watch it on Youku, our streaming platform, or UC Browser, our web browser. And the idea wasn't to get anybody to watch anything for 8 hours, but if you were a fan of a brand, you might get an email, hey, Gap is going to be doing its fashion show on the Tmall Global Fashion Show at this time. Come check it out. And then the coolest thing about all of this, and you can kind of see this a little bit in the mobile phone right there. She clicks that button, and that takes her to the Tmall store where she buys that particular item. So we were facilitating commerce immediately. A few years ago, there was a lot of talk about fast retailers. I think this is pretty fast. So that's it. I hope that was helpful and useful. And
Thank you, Brian. That was awesome. Yeah, I think especially what you touched on towards the end there. I'd spoken about at the beginning that Alibaba is seeking 2 billion customers, but also seeking to reinvent retail and to make business easy anywhere. And you had also mentioned the potential of cross-border commerce. So I think it's worth making sure that everybody in the room really understands what cross-border commerce is and what it isn't. So cross-border commerce right now is worth about $270 billion in transactions. And essentially what that means is the buyer and the seller are not necessarily in the same country. So you can be an American retailer selling directly to somebody in China. You can be a Chinese brand selling directly to somebody in Brazil. Okay? And at some point, the products are going to cross the border. To put this in perspective, cross-border e-commerce, which is really the evolution of e-commerce, within 3 years is going to be worth $1 trillion in transactions. And so when I'm talking to my clients or those who are interested, it's important to understand that e-commerce is no longer a single channel. It's no longer a single platform. But e-commerce has become global. It's become digital. It's become interactive. And certainly it's become international. And so I think there's nobody out in the world right now who's doing more to build out the understanding and the infrastructure of cross-border commerce than Alibaba is. So, what I see the company really doing is, building out cross-border e-commerce, reinventing retail, and really truly making it easy to do business anywhere. So where does all of that vision come in terms of, for a better understanding of Alibaba offers so much for American companies going to China and Chinese companies to come here. What does the future of cross-border information and commerce look like in Alibaba's world?
So you mentioned the 2 billion consumers. Right now we have about 500 million. I mentioned that earlier, active buyers on the site. There's not 2 billion people in China, so that means we're going to have to go to other places. China is still the place where a lot of these goods and services are produced, and what we want to do, where we think the first place we want to be is in some of these other markets that share similar characteristics as China, but maybe a little bit earlier in their development stage. So we're in India in a big way. We're in Indonesia in a big way, and a lot of the things, no market is totally the same, but a lot of the things that we learned in China, we think we can help, we can bring to other markets. We think there'll be some value there. India is really interesting. Recently, the government there changed the policies around circulation of cash, right? They're trying to remove small bills from the market. India is a country with a large population, and so you can imagine if cash goes away, they still need to transact. So there's a big opportunity for us to help facilitate payments. In terms of kind of cross-border trade, Jack has this very big vision, which is not a this quarter thing. It's probably not even the next year thing, but it's something we're working towards. It's not even an Alibaba thing. It's something he calls Electronic World Trade Platform. And it's basically trying to take the concept of making commerce frictionless, as it is here in the United States with an Amazon, or in China with any of our platforms, and opening up that, using technology to make transactions across borders less difficult, especially for small businesses. So this electronic world trade platform is a little conceptual right now. You need the cooperation of policymakers. Some people have called it a WTO 2.0, and the WTO has expressed a lot of support for this because they want to see more trade. Jack is a famous, well, I wouldn't say an often repeated thing that he says is, trade is good for peace. When trade stops, wars start. And so this is really kind of a personal thing for him. We want to see the development of other trading partners. And so it's about lowering the barriers to trade with technology. The first globalization kind of 1.0 was dominated by big multinational companies, and what we're trying to do is create the pathways and the policy environment that'll let smaller businesses sell internationally.
Well, it's interesting you should mention the globalization 1.0, because for those who've been in this room before, when I presented, they often hear me talk about this big picture in global business that in the book I termed globalization 2.0, and taking that from a digital and retail perspective. So, the big picture that everyone needs to understand is that in globalization 1.0, which largely took place from the early 70s to about 2010, that's when we first started to see manufacturing move to other parts of the world. We started to see for the first time, and it's hard to believe now, but up until the early 2000s, about 90% of consumption and wealth was concentrated in about 30 Western nations. And so what we've really seen in this 2.0 world is the emergence of 4 megatrends that are driving everything that we do today, including Alibaba, and that is the reemergence of China. Right? People sometimes think about the emergence of China onto the world stage. And I have to remind people that China was the dominant global economic, cultural, military, and scientific power for roughly 2,500 years. As late as 1850, China accounted for 30% of global GDP. 30%. So China is not emerging. China is waking up from a 100-year nap and really reestablishing itself in its normal place in the global economy. So we see, number one, reemergence of China. Number two, the emergence of the digital world and e-commerce, and now the evolution to cross-border e-commerce. And this is something that Brion talked about, but a lot of people don't think about it first, is the importance of supply chain and logistics to the world we live in today, right? And so much of the last 50 years, supply chain and logistics has been a function of a business. It is now the business driver. And so when you look at what Alibaba is doing and what Amazon is doing, what other marketplaces are doing, is they are taking digital collection of data and crunching of data, supply chain, retail, and China, and they're driving their business. So tell us a little bit more about how Alibaba is integrating all of these digital elements and the entertainment into retail, because I think that's so important in terms of how to spread the Alibaba retail message globally.
So I think there's 2 ways to answer this question. I've heard there's an author out there who wrote a book on us, Duncan Clark. He described the competitive advantage as, in 3 ways. He called it an iron triangle. He said you had to have the commerce platform, you have to have the payments, and you have to have the logistics. And if you have those all in place, you really have a formidable position. Somebody that just creates an e-commerce platform has a difficult time if they don't have the logistics ironed out. Similar with payments. Amazon's approached this differently because they have a very different, there's a different marketplace. I think I described some of those factors. The other way to look at this is really, through the lens of how what's the future? For us, we've created, some of these businesses were created. The slide that has the Super ID slide on it, I think, tells the story. Some of these businesses were created very deliberately to support the success of the e-commerce business, the three I just mentioned. Some of them were bought through acquisition. Some of the media entertainment, most of the media entertainment properties, all of the local delivery properties were bought. AliTrip, I think we started from scratch. I could be wrong about that. Because we saw that if you understand the kinds of things people are, the kinds of entertainment people enjoy, you have an opportunity to sell them potentially a ticket to a live event, or if they're really into sports shows, you can present opportunities to buy sporting equipment. Some examples like that. So, for us, the future is really to be able to do this in a respectful way, but understand the consumer. And I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about groups of people, because when you have 500 million people, there's probably people that are similar to me that want to buy the same kinds of things. So yeah, I think that's the way we would look at that development.
And maybe we want to touch on one of the interesting things you talked about was this idea of the Chinese consumer largely skipped in some ways the physical retail environment, stuck to more traditional retail environments, but jumped right into mobile. Yeah. How is that going to, you think, spread around the world? Is that the future? Is mobile commerce? Is Alibaba looking to take mobile commerce more global?
Yeah. Well, are we looking to take it more globally? So the first places that we're interested in are economies that, like I said before, share similar characteristics as China, very large populations, maybe earlier in their development cycles. And so we're going to bring a solution that's unique and meets the needs of that market. India, as I just mentioned, has the cash payments issue. So we're going in with, my understanding is we're going in with Alipay, pretty strong, partnering with some of their payments platforms. One of the things that we're not doing, and I didn't really talk a lot about today, is we're not coming to the United States to sell to U.S. consumers in a big way. We have a property that does that, AliExpress, but the real focus for the company is helping U.S. businesses, retailers, brands, entrepreneurs sell to the 500 million consumers, hopefully one day 2 billion consumers that we have on the platform. I'm not an expert in mobile trends. But there's a little bit of a push-pull here. How much value do people see in consuming over the mobile phone? How entrenched are they in their habits of buying maybe on a desktop? But we see in the United States definitely a trend towards more mobile consumption.
So you make a good point. Right now, for the American brand, the American retailer, the American investor, most of what they're going to see in Alibaba is going to be focused on how do I reach the Chinese consumer. And, in having talks with, some of the other people at Alibaba, the idea is really the products that people want outside of the most developed parts of the world are made in the West, and the people who have the most desire for those products and the highest runway to growth is in the East. And so largely, at this point, it's largely about connecting Western products, ideas, and services to the East, but also bringing Chinese-made or Asian products to other markets as well.
I mean, you're a way better person to talk about, how to take advantage of that opportunity because of the work that you do. So, I mean, I'd love to hear a little bit from you, like, what are the kinds of things that a brand or a small business, or a medium-sized business needs to look at to really get on our platform or get on any platform in China and so.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to understand about reaching Chinese consumers from an e-commerce perspective is that today Alibaba, and correct me if my numbers are a little bit off, they change so quickly, but Alibaba reaches about a 76% market penetration for e-commerce transactions in China.
Sounds about right.
It could be 74 one day, 75, 76. So that basically means 7.5 out of every 10 engagements in e-commerce happen through Alibaba. I think the number is actually higher for an Alibaba unit having a touch point for e-commerce transactions in China. So somebody may not be buying from an Alibaba platform, but an Alibaba technology will have a role in roughly 85% of all e-commerce transactions in China. The number 2 player in China is a company called JD.com. They're a good company. They're very different from Alibaba. They operate on a more wholesale to retail traditional model. So you sell them your goods, and they sell it on their retail platform. So the bottom line is, if you're interested in reaching the Chinese e-commerce consumer, and frankly, if you're interested in reaching Chinese consumers, it's almost imperative that you work with Alibaba. For a lot of companies, the bigger value in selling on Alibaba's platforms is not in the number of units sold, but the actual number of eyeballs they reach. And so, in a country that is as large and diverse as China, 1.4 billion people, the size of the United States or Europe, there's not a lot of mass media out there that you can use to reach Chinese consumers. So Alibaba is the great platform for branding. It's a great platform for sales. I think the most important thing for people to understand is that Tmall flagship stores are the primary vehicle for billion-dollar multinational companies to reach Chinese consumers. And Tmall Global, as Brion mentioned, is for the small to mid-size retailer brand trying to reach Chinese consumers. And the key differentiator is not only does a Tmall Global store allow you to not have to set up a business entity in China, but it also allows you to send your goods to China to have them stored in a free trade zone in a bonded warehouse. And so you can put those goods directly in China. Somebody orders it on Tmall Global, and they'll have it in 24 to 36 hours. And so I think just a couple key takeaways on the consumer is they live their lives mobile. The average Chinese person spends about 6 hours a day on their mobile phone. The second thing to understand is that social media is not a distraction in China. Social media is the driver of your life. It's where you go to be entertained. It's where you go to interact with your friends. It's where you go to interact with your family. It's where you go to read your news. And so, Alibaba has a lot of integration into the social media life in China, the most important of which is, most of you have heard of WeChat. So WeChat has roughly 700 million users just in China. And so when we look at what the Chinese consumer is today, number one, they're mobile. Number two, they're social media driven. Number three, they're sophisticated. The days of you build it and they will come in China are over. It is a highly competitive, bloody game to get into retail and branding in China. And so companies need to be sophisticated. They need to be as sophisticated as a Chinese consumer. They can no longer be condescending to Chinese consumers, and they have to realize that this is the largest and most important consumer group in the world. And in my opinion, the number one way in the world to reach them is through Alibaba. So I think we're going to do, at this point, a couple of questions from the audience. And I saw your hand go up first.
If I could just, sorry, if I could interrupt, if you could please make sure your microphone's turned on, as well as if you could state your name and affiliation, please.
Henry on HHN Capital. So, Brion, you showed some interesting slides no surprise, the retail environment is quite weak, and then one slide just sums it up in terms of the market cap, the delta, in terms of how much it dropped. Now, a lot of the retailers in the world traditional retailers are changing their strategy from reducing their store count to more online presence.
Yep.
So with that said, there's a convergence with e-commerce companies like Alibaba, maybe compared to Walmart. Now, with that said, with Amazon opening some stores, can you share Alibaba's retail strategy, if any, and whether retail will be an important part overall with the company's overall strategy going forward?
Yeah, certainly. I talked about two examples, Suning and InTime, in the presentation. Those are two examples. One is an actual retailer, the other is a shopping mall operator. We recently announced another one with a very large shopping mall company in China. So the strategy is not to replicate what they're doing or to invest, as Amazon is doing, in actual physical retail stores. It's to work with people that have those physical retail stores to improve their experience, improve their leverage of technology, and create better experiences for the consumer, so the consumer wants to go into the store rather than buying it purely online. I mean, I think for me personally, any purchase that I make that's a new purchase, that's not something I'm buying every week, I'm spending, there's a threshold. I'd like to see it, I'd like to touch it, or I'd like to have some experience with it. And so what we want to do is help retailers create experiences with that tie into the online environment, make everything less friction filled.
So just one quick follow-up. So more or less, it's more like a showroom than anything else, right?
I wouldn't say just a showroom. I mean, when you're using the technology, sometimes you might have somebody on the online saying, "All right, I know the 3 things that I want, and I'm going to go make a purchase decision today. Before I do, I want to be in the store to do it."
Henry, I was going to say, to add to that, the bigger picture, Henry, is that the biggest e-commerce platforms, and if you look at Alibaba, Amazon, Rakuten in Japan, all of them, where the world is going right now, where we're trying to lead these guys, is out of their death spiral, which is into, you kept hearing me refer to reinventing retail. Retail is going to go through a transformation here in the next couple years, where it's an entirely new model that actually skips over multi-channel, skips over omni-channel, and the end game is uni-channel. The e-commerce guys realize that bricks and mortar supports e-commerce, and if bricks and mortar dies, so will e-commerce, and vice versa. So what you're really seeing here, what these guys are doing and others are doing, is blending bricks and mortar, online retail, wholesale, specialty, all of that powered by digital, cloud, technology, virtual reality, into a single uni-channel retail experience.
That's where the puck is moving. But I think all of us have probably bought something online from somebody that wasn't an Amazon or wasn't somebody that has a lot of scale. I recently bought a couple of shirts from a retailer, specialty shirt retailer, happened to be based in the UK, and it took 3 weeks for the shirts to get there. And I could, the traditional retailers that are moving online are finding that they're having to learn a whole new set of skills beyond producing a great shirt. And they started with the great shirt and then developed this expertise in physical retail. And so what we want to do is help them leapfrog that process, accelerate their development into the online space, and figure out what the right mix of things is in the physical world, the physical retail environment.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I thought I saw somebody here. Sure. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Gilberto Gums. I'm a student at Medgar Evers College. I had a quick question. Earlier you mentioned Jack Ma's affinity to technology and how important he feels it is in e-commerce, but you also mentioned some difficulty that sometimes we may have with countries due to their policies. And you also spoke of lowering the barriers to trade with technology, correct? So my question is, like, in a time when globalization is under challenge because of these factors, what is the way forward for international trade growth, despite these minor setbacks?
So I'll take this first very briefly from a political standpoint, and then from a kind of just a very practical standpoint. People need to understand the benefits of trade to them. Jack has said, you don't kill the baby because it cries. You pick it up and you nurse it along in its growth. And so what we're seeing right now is a reaction and a justifiably understandable reaction to some of the dislocation that's happening in, as a result of globalization. The first wave of manufacturers leaving, for example, the United States. And so, this article that I mentioned in the New York Times from the weekend, 1 in 10 Americans works in retail. So retail goes away, there's a problem. So we all have kind of a role. I'm not just talking about economically, I'm talking about socially. So there's a role there to help technology, help these businesses preserve their sustainability. From a practical standpoint, a lot of countries have, just one example, something called a de minimis. If there's over a certain amount of money, Michael probably knows this better than me, depending on the country, you can import it duty-free, right? Or under a certain amount of under a certain volume of pieces, you can import it duty-free. And so if you're trying to foster the small guys, you can create policies that are better allow the smaller seller to conduct commerce electronically. Mm-hmm. One of the reasons why they haven't been able to, there's obviously a revenue aspect to eliminating or raising de minimis requirements, mm-hmm. but there's also like a traceability, a trackability thing that you couldn't do. You had a difficult time if you're the customs agent understanding how many pieces this person's brought in or how much volume this, what's the value of this merchandise that's being brought in. But with technology, you can trace it back to the source and understand you've got better information to make better decisions on, and that gives policymakers opportunities to create, to make different decisions.
Yeah, and the only thing I would add to that is, at a time when there are voices in this country talking about retreating from global trade, I can assure you global trade will go on without us. And there are plenty of other countries led by China who will step into that breach. And it was very telling that President Xi went to Davos and got on the stage and expounded vociferously, clearly, and abundantly on the value of global free trade. And there's something going on right now in China called the One Belt, One Road initiative. And China is building a new Silk Road from China and Asia into Europe, and is building a circular maritime trade infrastructure, so it's a land and sea. There's an estimated $7 trillion worth of international trade to be had by getting involved in the One Belt, One Road initiative. If we sit it out, that's fine. China, Russia, Vietnam, Indonesia, India, Sudan, they'll all be happy to take our place. I think I have time for one more. I want to get somebody from this side of the room. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi. Alex from Applico. You had mentioned that Alibaba isn't as interested in selling to consumers in the U.S. Amazon Business is making a lot of waves in selling B2B, bringing their marketplace model to the B2B industry, which by some estimates is about $6 trillion. The irony is that a lot of the third-party sellers selling on Amazon Business are actually buying things on Alibaba and then just reselling them onto Amazon Business. So would you say that, we've heard a little bit, I guess, from Jack and wanting to do different things in the U.S. Is Alibaba looking at maybe approaching the B2B marketplace in the U.S.?
So the Alibaba.com platform is a B2B marketplace, and that's exactly what you're talking about. It was our first real business. One of the first marketing campaigns the company had, I learned this from somebody who's been at the company for 16 years. She was our first employee in California. She said our campaign was buy on Alibaba and sell on eBay. This was back when eBay was the top of the marketplace market. So I mean, yes, that is a piece of the business, but in terms of like focus and priority, the real focus is helping small businesses, medium-sized businesses, and agriculture from the United States sell to China because of the demand that I talked about from the Chinese consumer. There may be a day where we come here, but that day I think is after that. It's after India, other markets where there's significant consumer base and there's a similarity in terms of, like I was saying before, the development cycle earlier in their development.
Just add that to the B2B approach, you're going to be hearing a lot more from Alibaba about the B2B2C model, whereby small enterprises in the U.S. can sell to a small enterprise somewhere else who sells on to the consumer as well. So that's something I keep an ear out for. So I'm getting the "it's time to eat" sign. So I think I'm going to have to close things down here. I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and
thank you
to Brion.
Thank you, Mr. Brion Tingler and Michael Zakkour, for your insightful and informative talk. So we shop at Alibaba all the time, but we don't get the whole picture. So I think Mr. Tingler and Mr. Zakkour has mapped the trajectory of the growth of Alibaba, its position status not only in China but also in the world. So how the different platforms work together to promote each other. So I really like the concepts they talked about, such as the cross-border e-commerce and cross-border trade. I think these concepts, such as incorporation, such as collaboration, integration, and cross-border, are the very concepts which we use to build this Confucius Institute. So thank you again for your wonderful talk. And my thanks also goes to our distinguished guests from Medgar Evers College, from the Chinese Consulate, from the Old Westbury, and all the audience today for your presence and participation. So we have very good Chinese reception outside the global classroom. If you have any questions, you can continue this conversation while enjoying our food. Thank you so much.